U.S. banks warn of coming disaster and they're bracing for impact. Hey, everybody, you're watching Bull, Boom, Bear, Bust. Bulls and Bears back with another dose of economic reality, the BX4, Bull to the Bust. Let's go ahead and get right into it here. Let's start off with the rate cut decision. No rate cut today, but the Fed sounded very confident, or they sounded very interested, I should say, in cutting rates later this year. And we know the markets are salivating for a big rate cut this year. We've got some profits to talk about here. Big company that we've talked about here many times saw some very nice profits today. Of course, the warning from the banks, we're going to get into that here in just a bit here. Now, what the Fed is saying is that if inflation stays cool, might as well cut rates, right? Because people are having an easier time. Meanwhile, supposedly people are having an easier time, according to what they said. Why do delinquencies keep rising? If people are getting further ahead or having an easier time, as they put it, wouldn't delinquencies be dropping? And we're going to talk about the delinquency report here in just a little bit here. It's pretty interesting when you look into it here. Look at this here. It's not just the U.S. Look what's happening over in Australia. And I have to mention this because people think that if we just get somebody new in office in November, that everything's going to turn around and be fine, folks. It's not going to matter. It's the debt machine, the debt system is still going to keep going. Record insolvencies and repossessions, more signs of recession. This is Australia, folks. Record insolvencies and repossessions. You think this is more than just a United States problem and a leadership problem here in the U.S.? And you still really think that something in November is going to change this? The right gets elected, the left gets elected. Folks, the two parties are out there, and some people say it's just a uniparty, just masquerading as two separate parties. Many people would say, including myself, that they're all working for the same system, the top of the pyramid, the money printers. That's what it is, folks. The money creators, they control everything, right? We're talking about the central banks. They control what the news says to you. The news is very controlled. A lot of you might already know this, right? It's all controlled, folks. It's not going to make much of a difference. It's worldwide. Let's move on to what the banks are warning us about here. And we know that the banks are loaning out way more money than they have. In fact, they don't have to have any money in reserves. But even with that, I don't think they want to be in the news for having to get bailed out here. So what's happening? U.S. banks warn of disaster and brace for higher delinquencies despite rate cut expectations. So get this. JP Morgan Chase, one of the country's largest banks, set aside nearly $1.2 billion. It's not a lot. You may think it's a lot. It's a lot of money for probably just a person. But when you see the amount of loans that are out there, $1.2 billion is nothing. Setting aside $1.2 billion from its revenues to raise its loan loss provision to a staggering amount of $3 billion. So $3 billion is a lot. Well, not really. When you look at the amount of debt out there, folks, total consumer debt, $17 trillion. $17 trillion. So when you look at $3 billion, it's a speck on the map. It's a drop in the ocean of all the money that's actually loaned out. And of course, Chase is one of the biggest banks. This is not all Chase debt, 17 trillion. But you get the point. These banks supposedly bracing for things to get worse. If they're bracing for things to get worse and the banks think that things are going to get worse, why is the Fed talking about a rate cut, right? Or are they talking about a rate cut because they really think that the consumer is going to need it? Folks, a 0.25% rate cut, 0.25% on the Fed funds rate. It's not going to make that much of a difference for people that are already buried under massive amounts of debt. Again, what is it? Latest fourth quarter of this year, first quarter of this year rather, quarter one, 2024. We're up there at over 17 trillion, right? About 17.5 trillion dollars. Second quarter numbers aren't even in here yet. And of course, it got worse. You notice though what happened with debt after the financial crisis, 2008. Debt actually dropped, right? Because banks were tightening for a short while. Banks were actually tightening, and then everything got dropped to 0% rates. And then, of course, people borrowed money like crazy, and we all know what happened then. Debt just kept going up. higher and higher, faster and faster. Folks, so this is all about the banks and the ability for banks to loan out money, and people borrow this money, they spend it, and that gives the illusion of economic growth, and it actually feeds on itself. It actually creates jobs. When people are spending money, even though it's borrowed money for the most part, it creates jobs. Where money is spent, you're going to need someone on the other side of the transaction typically. Of course, they're trying to go to AI and eliminate human jobs as much as possible. That's another big threat that's out there. But folks, it's the real deal. Now, in my last report, I talked about a city that's dropping in rents, and I said this could be a canary in the coal mine, and then I completely forgot to mention it. So I apologize for people that heard me say that at the beginning, but I didn't get to it. So this video is partly to cover this today. Right here, San Diego. Monthly rent in San Diego drops significantly year over year. This is pretty big, folks, because this is an indicator of where the housing market's going. And I'm going to tie these together here in a minute with home prices. The average rent dropped from 2,338 in 2023 to 2,170 in 2024. Still high, but a drop of 7%. Remember, drops are much more significant than price increases. Right? Think about it. When something increases 100%, let's say rent doubled from 1,000 to 2,000, that's a 100% increase from 1,000 to 2,000. Let's say then the rent drops back down from where it went up to, from 2,000 back to 1,000. That's only a 50% drop on the way down, right? So these drops are much bigger than people may think. It's only 7%, but that's going to erase 14% of rent gains. And rents are up about an average of 25% since 2020. So that's almost half the gains lost there. Half the rent increases that we saw in the past 4 years are lost just in 1 year. So things are unwinding here, and it gets to a point where when people start getting maxed out on their credit cards, when they're buried under debt, when they start getting further behind, that something's got to give. In the first place, you usually see it as rent. Why? Because rents, you need cash every month to meet the rent. San Diego County's vacancy rate climbed also to 6.36% as of the spring of this year. That's up from 3.9% from the spring 2023. Not quite doubling, but you see the trend here. Vacancies are up, rents are dropping. So this is what happens when consumers are so far in debt. They start to get maxed out. 1 in 5 credit card holders are maxed out right now on their credit card. So, and we've yet to see how the banks are going to react to this. So far, we haven't seen a big tightening of credit. All you have to do is look at the debt numbers. And when debt starts to drop, like we saw at that chart here a few minutes ago, like in 2008, debt actually dropped all the way up to 2012 because banks were very, very tight, right? Now we're in endless bailout land right now. That's the twilight zone of bailouts, right? Do all these banks just get endless bailouts so they never have to stop or they never have to tighten up their credit limits? That's the worrying part of it. If that's the case, you're just going to see inflation continue and never stop until hyperinflation is at all of our doorsteps, right? None of us want that, right? I'd rather see a rug pull the plug out of this debt system, let it all come crashing down, and start with something more solid and more sound foundation. And something else that we have to remind people of here, when the cost of living is so much, when debt is so high, when so many people are barely getting by, they have to find new ways to kick the can down the road. And one of those things is forgiveness and rescue programs. And we know that there's a lot of debt forgiveness being talked about right now. They've already paused the payments on student loan debt. Folks, look at this. This is out of Forbes. They're talking about now increasing the number of people that get their debt forgiven to 25 million people. 25 million borrowers will get student loan forgiveness. And this is updated emails that came out about this next debt relief plan, right? 25 million people, student loan forgiveness. They keep on increasing the number. But then people start looking at their own debt and they say, okay, I took out a mortgage, I ran up credit card debt, I've got medical debt. Why can't I get my debt forgiven, right? And then some people will say, well, no, they can't forgive everybody's debt. Who's going to pay it back? Folks, they can print the money. The student loan companies, which actually the government backs these loans anyway, so it's just government debt ultimately. And the government, what do? Do they ever say we can't afford a war Do they ever say, oh, we can't afford to send money over to this country, over to that country for weapons and war? No, they never say that because they know they can just print more and just add it to the debt. How do you think we got to 35 trillion? But that's the argument against massive debt forgiveness. Why don't they forgive everybody's debt? Forgive the mortgage debt, everything, the medical debt, erase it. So people will say, no, they can't do that. Who's going to pay for it? Folks, they don't pay for it anyway. They don't pay for any of this. They borrow the money. It gets added to the mountains of debt. Do you understand this yet? Am I making any sense to? I think most of you probably understand. There's still a few people though that I see you down in the comments and I see your reactions to what I'm saying. Who's going to pay for it, folks? They don't pay for it. The government doesn't pay for it. They just borrow more and more and more. How can they just borrow unlimited amounts of money? Because the money's not backed by anything. Ever since 1971, we got taken off the gold standard. Are you connecting the dots here yet, people? And I'm sorry, most of you are. I probably shouldn't let just a few knuckleheads, affect me or bother me. But I read the comments. I read the comments, and I still see people saying, "What's this guy talking about? This is not possible." Blah blah blah. What he's saying is impossible, folks. This is economic reality. I'm sorry to have to give you this bad news right now. I want you to listen to this. And also look at this if you can, unless you're driving or something, of course. But listen to this question from, I don't know who it was, but somebody asked Jerome Powell, is the Fed cutting rates just to make the economy look better before the November elections? And are you being political? Of course, he denied it. He's never going to say yes. But he's having to look down at his notes to answer this.
CBS News. Chair Powell, thanks for taking our questions today. You have consistently said that the Fed does not consider politics in making decisions. With a possible September rate cut on the table, it would be less than 2 months before the election, and former President Trump reportedly said that cutting rates so close to the election is something the central bank knows they shouldn't be doing. What's your response, and do you believe it's possible to really remain apolitical with a September rate cut?
I absolutely do, and I think it's, first of all, we haven't made any decisions. I would say it this way. Haven't made any decision about any future meeting. I don't know what the data will reveal or how that will affect the appropriate path of our policy. I really don't know. I do know how we will make that assessment. That's what I do know. So if you take a step back.
Keeps looking down at his notes. Are these pre-scripted questions? Like, does he know the questions and he's just reading off of a script?
Current situation, again, is inflation has come down much closer to our goal, and that's happened while unemployment has remained low. We're very tightly focused on.
Also, I have to remind you, inflation coming down doesn't mean things are getting cheaper. It just means prices are going up, but less slowly than before.
Using our tools to try to foster that state of affairs continuing. That's at each of our meetings and all of our decisions, our focus is strictly on that and really on nothing else, doing our part, whatever that part may be. We're using our best thinking. We're doing our best to understand the economy. We follow academics. We follow the many commentators who bless us with their commentary. But we don't change anything in our approach to address other factors like the political calendar. Congress has, we believe, ordered us to conduct our business in a non-political way at all times, not just some of the time.
Okay, you get the point. He keeps looking down. He's reading off of his notes. Folks, these questions are all telegraphed, right? They all know what's coming. Please let me know what you think about all this today. What's going to happen? I think the Fed's kind of freaking out. They're concerned about all these delinquencies that are rising. Consumers barely scraping by. They're looking for a reason to cut rates. Well, even if they do, it's not going to help much. It'll probably help the markets. The markets will go higher. Or it could be buy the rumor, sell the fact, because the markets have been pretty strong. There's something called buy the rumor, sell the fact. And could the markets just be pumped up on hopes of a rate cut? And then if there is a rate cut, that's going to be more of an alarming thing than it is a reassuring thing. And we're going to start to see a sell-off, right? So I think they're in a very tight spot right now. We're going to see how this all plays out. Of course, we're at the end of July today being July 31st. You might be watching this on August 1st because I'm putting this out kind of late at night. Either way, hope you all are doing well. Please come back to this channel for more economic updates. It's very critical time to stay ahead of the financial curve, to stay on top of the news, and see where this thing's going, folks. We'll see you here again soon, hopefully. Keep stacking. Bye for now, everybody. Peace.